In your time, you're dealing with an all-powerful ANC.
They behave like they still have a majority when they don't.
They weren't really telling you where the money was.
If only the issues we raised were acted upon, this commission will not be necessary.
Do you feel that the EFF measures up to what you're talking about?
So their ability to negotiate, if I can go a little further.
We need to stamp out corruption, but you want to say, but you are corrupt. For many, many, many years, there was one person whose name was synonymous with SCOPA, the Committee on Public Accounts, the man who sort of looks after where the finances are being managed or mismanaged in Parliament. And that man was Themba Godi, and he joins us today. Themba, welcome to the State of the Nation. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
You know, I was just sort of doing a little bit of research, and you were head of SCOPA for 13 and a half years. That's a hell of an innings, eh?
No, indeed. When I look at it now, when I look back, I realize it's quite a long time, and I'm sure it's a record that will stand there for quite some time.
Yeah.
So we haven't had a person in that long, and well, I'm happy that I could make some contributions for the time that I was in Parliament.
Yeah, because it's a very, very, on the one hand powerful, but on the other hand powerless position, isn't it? Because you are the guy who gets to ask the questions of people that are using taxpayers' money. And in your time, you're dealing with an all-powerful ANC that were listening to you and answering your questions, but they weren't really telling you where the money was.
Well, look, I think there are two things that for me stands out. One, it is the fact that I was able to get the committee to work as a team. You had members of the EFF, the DA, the IFP, and the ANC. We worked as a single unit where it would be difficult if you're an outsider to distinguish who comes from which party. Secondly, we were able to raise the standing of SCOPA in the public eyes to an unprecedented level, which led to an awareness on the part of the general populace around how finances are used or mismanaged. And, you know, if you take from Kwame Nkrumah's adage that the best way to fight corruption is to raise public indignity against it, I think we're able to achieve that. In terms of, you know, being listened to and acting upon, I think it is an inherent weakness of or shortcoming of the democracy that we have. Because as a committee of parliament, we cannot do anything that parliament is not empowered to do. And parliament is nowhere empowered to take any other action beyond public engagement with officials.
Yeah, and I suppose writing strongly worded letters, which because you were there, and one would have to categorize your time there as the height of malfeasance and state capture in South Africa. You saw it all happening long before we saw it on our television sets on the Zondo Commission.
No, very true. I mean, watching the Zondo Commission, I was like, but if only the issues we raised were acted upon, this commission will not be necessary, because to a very, very large extent, it was all about how the awarding of tenders was manipulated by this or that person. And I felt the Auditor General on an annual basis gave a much clearer and in-depth report on what is happening in each government department at a national, provincial, municipal level, and even give a summary of the general trends on an annual basis upon which we acted and which he also reported to cabinet. So if all these things were acted upon, I think we would not have had the necessity of wasting over R1 billion for a commission to talk about things that the Auditor General report on annually.
Yeah, or rather, you could have saved the country R1 trillion in the money that was stolen by primarily by the Jacob Zuma administration.
I assure you, if the Constitution gave me powers beyond what it has now, I would not have hesitated to act. So if there was no action, it's not a reflection on our inability to act than the inherent weaknesses. And I think if you take on my submission at the Zondo Commission, I said, first and foremost, parliamentary oversight is a political exercise. It must not be looked at as a purely administrative exercise, because then it gets impacted upon by politics. So when we at SCOPA meet, write a report, take it to the House, it is adopted, it becomes the property of the Speaker. So it is the Speaker who then writes to the Minister, and it is the Speaker who must then say, I've written to you, how do I follow up? If you look at the, there's a document which was called the Oversight and Accountability Model of Parliament. It had provisions that said, how does the Speaker follow up on resolutions of the House? What are the institutions that they must set up, which they didn't do. And I wrote to the House Chair, Mr. Frolick, on behalf of the committee, that we're saying, look, we are tired of writing reports year in and year out, and nothing happens. We are requesting the Speaker's office to set up a follow-up mechanism. We were promised that. It never happened.
You mentioned earlier that you got the committee to work together, and including there was a number of parties, one of which you mentioned was the ANC. Now, who was the ANC representative that was in your committee? Because, I mean, at that stage, the ANC was busy stealing all the money.
Well, look, when I came in, the committee, which was chaired by a gentleman, Francois Bjorkman from the National Party, was torn. They were very much divided coming out of the arms deal, interactions within the committee. So we're able to pull them together, and we worked. Interestingly, in 2019, when I didn't make it back to Parliament, all the ANC members in SCOPA did not go back to Parliament, which I found quite curious, that the experience that was accumulated there was just thrown away. Why? And in my own thinking, I felt these guys were punished for having been robust. But the leader of the ANC team in SCOPA was Mr. Mnyamezeli Boy, and you had notables like Vincent Smith and a number of others who tried their best, but
well, one couldn't accuse Vincent Smith of trying his best, because he also ends up on the wrong side of the law. And
look, I can tell you, Vincent came from, I think, was the most experienced of them all. Whatever is alleged of him, which is being ventilated in court, I can tell you that when it came to challenging and questioning officials, I found him to be more efficient than people who would make long winding statements, which officials preferred, because then you're winding time, So I wouldn't want to make judgments on individual members. Safe to say that insofar as our meetings were concerned, I was satisfied with their, with their portion.
Yeah, look, I suppose it's like on the odd occasion where you do have somebody, even here, when you're speaking to them and you know what their history was. But they're wonderful people.
Yeah.
They speak wonderfully. They tell you what all the problems were, but in actual fact, they were the problem. Right? you know that person sitting over here saying, we need to stamp out corruption, but you want to say, but you are corrupt. Okay. So, yeah, we definitely got that. And there's certainly no indignity at the moment. And do you think that, in a way, the way you've just put it adds to that problem, that somebody who has been found guilty, we are dignifying him by saying he was quite good in committee?
Yeah, the qualification in committee. Beyond committee, yes. I wouldn't comment.
Okay. Yeah. So now when you were there, And until the time that, and we're going to get into the politics in a minute, but until the time that you were no longer there, because there was every reason to believe you would have carried on as the chair of SCOPA. But you had an ANC with a big majority, which meant that they could kick for touch every time you brought out the report. And boy, did they kick for touch. They were very good at that.
No, look, it was not easy. And I can tell you, it was like the swimming of a duck. On the surface, it looks calm and it just glides. And yet underneath the water, there's furious paddling. So people saw us meeting in the committee, we were all good, we were all pushing together. But the fights I had to wage behind the scenes to maintain and sustain that focus were a lot. But I can also vouch and say, there were things that I did which I realized after I had left could no longer be done. For example, when we're dealing with the SASSA contract, I wrote to then President Jacob Zuma, summoning him to come before Parliament with the concurrence of the ANC members, because in his capacity as the chair of the Cabinet Subcommittee on Social Security, they didn't object. Well, he didn't come. All he did was to reshuffle the committee and put Jeff Hadebe as chairperson, which actually came to work in our favor, because when Jeff got the facts, he was able to push Batabile Dlamini and everybody else in the right direction.
Yeah. Right direction is an interesting way to put it. But let's just look at...
right direction in the sense that, remember, that contract with N1, was it Net1 or something?
Net1, yeah.
Was being renewed endlessly. Remember, it ended up in the Constitutional Court, and there was resistance from the department and SASSA. They tried every trick in the book not to get it done. And we had to say, no, your post office is a state entity, so give it to the post office. Anyway, it is struggling. By doing SASSA, it is going to generate some income and take the burden away from the state in terms of, in terms of sustaining it. So it was important. And then Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma came in as the minister responsible for monitoring data. She actually was the one who gave the final push to get it done.
Yeah. Now, when you look at it now, the role of SCOPA, the job that Songezo Zibi, who was here the other day, has. Do you think it's a little bit easier that you're not facing that behemoth, corrupt ruling party who's got the numbers, right? Do you think it's easier because he's going to be able to get... He knows that he can, that nobody can hide behind their majority as they were in your day. Would you have longed for that situation when you were head of SCOPA?
Well, look, I think it's Zambia or Namibia. In SCOPA, the opposition has the majority, irrespective of who the ruling party is. So I think that theoretically should have made their job a little easier. But I'm not sure if they did better than we did. Well, secondly, Songezo and the rest of them, they are technically part of the GNU, even though not in cabinet, but somehow they have an understanding with the ANC, which whether that will limit his ability to ramp it up, I'm not sure. But insofar as I'm concerned, I think I would have loved that.
Yeah.
Because despite what we're able to achieve and what we're able to do, and some of the changes we're able to push, even within the rules of Parliament, it was not easy. We were held by two things. One, the media. I made sure that I'm as accessible to the media as possible, which then put pressure on the ANC not to, act firmly. Secondly, the divisions within the ANC. Look, leading up to Polokwane, Parliament was controlled by the Zuma faction. Leading up to Nasrec, Parliament was controlled by the Ramaphosa faction. So that played positively into our ability to get certain things done, which ordinarily, would not have been able to do.
Yeah, so it's a bit like running a store at Christmas time. Suddenly you're going to have a lot of consumers. Yeah. Okay, so if one moves away from your time at SCOPA, which you were there and had such a presence for so long, and that's why I thought we'd lead off with that. But I want to talk about your own political story, because it's a fascinating one. You were your upbringing, your political early life was in the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress. And you only left them in those wonderful years of floor crossing. But tell me about PAC. What drew you to PAC, and eventually what pushed you away from the PAC?
Well, in 1983, I was doing my matric. It was called matric then. It's called grade 12 now. And together with a group of friends, growing up in the rural areas of Mpumalanga, we set up a political party, which we felt should be a useful tool to mobilize people in the rural areas to participate in politics. End of the year, I'm here in Gauteng, visiting my father, working there, and when I got paid, I went to buy books. And one of the books I bought was by Professor Tom Lodge, Black Politics in South Africa since 1945. It's very interesting. I read that book, and after reading it, I took a personal decision. I'm going to be a member of the PAC. Fortunately, a month later, I was going to the University of the North to start my university education. That was now January 1984. And luckily, I was able somehow to link up with PAC people. And that's how I then became part of the PAC at TEFLOB. Very difficult period. The ANC had full spectrum domination, very intolerant, and were physically assaulting their opponents. But somehow we survived. Finished my studies, went back home, continued my work there. When the liberation movements were unbanned, in the first internal conference of the PAC, I was elected National Secretary for Youth Affairs, which then brought me into the leadership of the party. The late Clarence Makwetu, Johnson Blambo, former Deputy Chief Justice Dikgang Mseneke, Judge Siriti, Judge Mavunla, all those people that I grew up admiring. I later became national organizer. I left my job as a teacher to work full-time against advice, but I was determined. I became deputy president, and when we left in September 2007, through floor crossing, which was, I think that was the last, and interestingly, we're the only party that still exists from those who formed parties through floor crossing. We formed the EPC because, the PAC has been engulfed in chronic infighting throughout its exile years and even after the unbanning. And some of us felt, look, it's pointless. We want to focus on what we can do rather than. And when you operate in an environment where the constitution can be suspended, and indeed it was subsequently suspended when we left, we felt, look, it has gone beyond. But the message that, Sobukwe had crafted for us remained fresh, remained relevant, remained true. And that is why even in our own constitution currently, we still reflect on Sobukwe, on Motuping, on Raburoko, and even the founders of the ANC Youth League in the 1940s, because Sobukwe and company left the ANC as members of the Youth League to pursue its program of 1949. So what pushed us away was was those things, and some level of a sense of stagnation in the thinking, in the approach. And I think events subsequent till to date, I think, have somehow vindicated our position insofar as the PAC is concerned.
Let's go back to the early years or the decision to join the PAC.
Yeah.
Explain to me what the difference is between the PAC, the ideological difference between the PAC and the ANC. What was it that drew you to the one and not the other? Because as you said, the ANC had all of these structures. It was a far bigger organization. It was the broad church, etc. Every business needs a world-class video to show to your clients and prospective clients. When the Stream-In team isn't filming the state of the nation, they are producing those world-class videos for companies just like yours. They have got all of the equipment, drones, microphones, whatever you need, and the technical know-how to film a proper video for your company. Visit their website. What was it that you found in the PAC that you didn't find in the ANC?
Well, I think I found that the PAC gave me an opportunity to feel being myself. You know, we grew up in an environment where we're forced to have double consciousness, meaning when I'm in the village, I'm living as a villager, as an African, as this, what my community believes in and how it exists. But outside it, there were certain norms and values that I must adjust to. And in the PAC, I felt I have the possibility to be myself. Because you see, unless I'm myself, I can't be anything to you, you know. And the message of the PAC looked at the current environment of contestation and conflict, but then painted the picture of a future beyond conflict, which then harmonizes everybody in the context of their common humanity. But that common humanity arises from my acknowledgement of who I am and what I am, and accepting who you are, but appreciating that at the end of the day, we're all human beings. That's why the slogan was Africa for the Africans, Africans for humanity, humanity for God. I felt there was something substantive than the ANC's were anti-apartheid. It's okay to be anti-something, but what are you for? You know, I found that and I hate, but let me quote Helen Zille, the ANC doesn't know what it stands for. So there was no way one could identify with that. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned Helen Zille, and just it sort of immediately brings to the question of, I grew up in the era where, you know, the PAC were the ultimate, what's a doomsday party, right? Yeah. As a white person.
Yeah.
Where did the PAC stand on race, especially on the white community? And, you know, there are other communities, but let's talk about it in that sense because it's always clearer and it usually has its spectrum from there.
Yeah. Well, as far as I know, and I'll need to be proven wrong, the word non-racial was coined by Sobukwe. And he says it was in his endless debates with his white friend, the journalist Benjamin Gongrod. Yeah. And the non-racialism of the PAC was, or of the Africanists was, insofar as it relates to human beings. The word race has no plural. There's only one race, the human race to which we all belong. So our attitude towards white people, so to speak, was that as ordinary citizens of the country, they have a bright future and a full contribution to make. What we're against is white domination. And that is why you found that, during the era of Thabo Mbeki, the PAC had a white councillor in East London, Dr. Gazi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I served with him. He served 2 terms. By the 3rd term, he resigned because of ill health. So, fact of the matter is that instead of camouflaging and sugarcoating issues, the Africanists were saying, let's face up to the challenges without seeking to, sugarcoat issues, but with a firm perspective towards the future, which said, if we cross this river of conflict, the synthesis, it's where we all live harmoniously. And that is why when Sobukwe was asked, but who is an African? He said an African is any indigenous person and anyone who owes his or her loyalty to Africa, works for its development, and accepts the democratic rule of the African majority. You see, he didn't say accept the majority rule, democratic rule of the African majority. So, look, it was neither here nor there as far as we're concerned. I think the issue was merely that to people who are used to privilege, equality feels like oppression.
So now when you started the APC, which is the African People's Convention, was that very much based on those principles?
Everything. We didn't, because like I said, the message of the Africanists remained and remains true. The problem was the platform to articulate it, called PAC.
Yeah.
It was an organizational problem, not so much an ideological question. So we have maintained, we have sustained everything that the Africanists have stood for. That's why if you go and look at our papers or our constitution, we talk of a new social order that is democratic in form, non-racial in character, socialistic in content, Africanistic in orientation, and creative in purpose. And I'm underlining creative because it behoves us to think as we confront the challenges and the issues that face us on a day-to-day basis without being dogmatic.
Yes.
Yeah.
So where does that then put the APC on issues like, for example, BEE or land redistribution, all of these hot button issues? Where does that put you? Because at the moment, listening to Minister Nyonsho from the PAC, who's got 1 seat and then he's a cabinet minister, he sounds pretty much like, I suppose, Aaron Motsoaledi. He sounds the same. I don't hear any difference. I don't hear any Africanism coming out of him. I hear a lot of triumphalism.
Look, you have 2 types of land tenure system in the country currently. One is the communal land ownership and also private ownership. And communal land ownership arises from the historical and cultural land ownership system amongst the African people, whereas private ownership of land is premised on the Roman Dutch law, I suppose. Our approach, first and foremost, is that land should not be viewed as a commodity. Land should be viewed as the natural heritage of all of us, and we must all have access and utilize that land equally and preserve it and leave it for the benefit of future generations. So we would want that land must be nationalized and socialized. It must be nationalized and socialized. Already, land in communal areas, it's sort of nationalized because it is in the hands of the highest political authority in those areas who are the chiefs. It's only land outside those areas that utilizes, private ownership of land. It must be socialized, meaning how it is utilized and distributed and managed must be through popular practice, which means it must be in the hands of the people rather than, minerals are nationalized, but what does that mean? It's only nationalized to manage and enable those who have money to exploit it, not for the benefit of the people. So that is what we would want, to no foreign ownership of land. None whatsoever. Secondly, land ownership, especially for productive farming, there has to be categories of farms in terms of size. But no person can or should have 5 farms or 10 farms and all that kind of stuff. So that women, young people, poor people should, if they have the capability and the interest, have equal access to land, and not on the basis of how much money you have. So that's
and
how.
Who manages this? How does it get managed? Because I mean, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
As you say it, right? And you could write a book. It sounds wonderful. But now you and I are farming next to one another. You are better than me. You're suddenly creating crops that are far better than mine. What stops me from saying, well, actually, I want that land? Do you know what I mean?
No.
I see what you do there, but actually, I was always farming that area.
No. Once we have gone beyond the era of struggle, or when the Africanists take over, everyone who is a citizen of the country will be treated the same way, irrespective. So looking like me will not necessarily give you an advantage over any other person. And the process and the principle of land acquisition, land distribution will apply equally without reference to what is your surname, what is your name. So if you can't be envious of your neighbor and say, because he looks like Mike, I can start to say, no, but my ancestor used to live here, therefore, otherwise it will be recipe for chaos. I believe that, like I said, white South Africans, like any other, whether Indians, they will all have, as Sobukwe said, a bright future in the country as normal citizens of the country. However, what we are most interested in is governance. Because you can have the best policies, but if you have bad governance, it will just mess up everything and lead everything to collapse. So there will be a high premium, at least from our side, on good governance, ensuring that people are happy, their well-being is catered for, because people will not eat slogans. It's at the practical level where things are done that we need to be, we need to be strong.
Okay, so explain to me where this kind of thinking has worked. Give me one example of where this sort of version of social harmony based on the state owning everything has worked. Give me one example.
Yeah, look, I'm giving you a theoretical perspective. That's where you start.
Yeah.
When you go to implement, implementation depends on the forces and factors at that particular point. You can't drive straight if the road is turning right. I'm trying to think at the top of my head.
Because
countries that have exercised land redistribution and they have seen an uptake in food production. I think if you look at the Sahel, currently, Burkina Faso, there has been a great uptake in food production because the land tenure system has been so changed as to ensure that people have access to land, but also have the means. When the National Party or whatever party was in power passed the Native Land Act in 1913, what did they do? 1914, they established the Land Bank because without it, it would not have gone anywhere. So we have said our new social order must be creative in purpose, meaning we will not necessarily seek to copy someone who has done it and succeeded. What factors might have led to their failure or success may not necessarily be present at any given point in time when we take over. However, our commitment to the principle, because it is a principle of equity, it is a principle of justice, a principle of fairness, it's a principle of democracy at a social and economic level. That one remains and will not bend. How you achieve that and how you implement. I mean, you go to Russia, even Lenin took over, there was war communism, there was new economic policy. All of those reflected changes in policy in response to material conditions existing at that given point in time.
It also led to 20 million people dying of starvation.
Well. I hear these numbers being bandied around, but when you look at the population growth in the USSR, it is inconsistent with a country that is losing so many millions. Yes. So, okay. But I think, look,
let's rather go to the sort of political scene as it looks now.
Yeah.
There's many parties that claim to be Africanist, and you, based on the principles of Robert Sobukwe, do you feel that the EFF measures up to what you're talking about?
Look, the acid test for all ideas is social practice. So people may call themselves whatever they prefer to, but it is practice that determines whether one is or not. And my view of parties like the EFF, MK, is that at a fundamental level, they are ANC members, but radical ANC members. They are not able to fully break free from the template of practice and knowledge production that they got from the ANC. So I hear them, but I'm like, okay, that's great. Let's see how it goes.
And you must have an interesting view of Mkhonto weSizwe, largely because you do have the views that you've got around a couple of things. The thing about MK is that it's hard to say whether they are trying to be what the IFP was, which is a sort of a Zulu traditionalist, royalist party. I've heard that from them many times. Then there's the other part that you could say, Floyd Shivambu, this is a Marxist, Leninist, Fanoniist. He's running out of ists, but party that, Pretoria shall provide and other myths. And then the third part being a party that's ultra-capitalist run. In other words, you're as a capitalist myself, the real true capitalist is often the thief. He understands business better than anybody else. Yeah. And all of those people that you had to come up against back in your SCOPA days now form part of their party. All of those people that kept us engaged in the Zondo Commission for a year are now back in Parliament. It's pretty crazy. So, in that case, you've got there's a real web of three different types of parties. On the one hand, very traditional, the other hand, communist, the other hand, state capture. What do you make of them? Which one are they?
Look, that party still has to go to a policy conference to adopt policies from what I know, and also what they also say. And indeed, you get statements coming from all sorts of angles. But I think they have, I think in their political DNA, what comes from the ANC, of almost trying to be everything to everybody. Although I think they have taken a posture that Ramaphosa is liberal, and to be distinct from him, they have taken a sort of a leftist position. But given some of the contradictions that come, you want to say, but wait, which is which? And which should we assume is the primary? Is the party a contested terrain in terms of ultimate policy. So from where I'm seated, that's why I said I look at all these parties, I include them. I say, well, these are angry ANC members who say a number of things, but whether they actually believe and live them, it's something else. And I must say, at the level of values, how do you say you are fighting for poor people, you stand for poor people, you want to bring about change, and then you live an ultra luxurious life? How does this measure up? I'm talking here of some of the things we see with the EFF. Now, when you say you want the land must be given back to the chiefs. That sounds more feudalistic for me than anything. So there's an attempt, in my view, to be radical, but to be everything to almost anybody and everybody who is angry.
Okay, I want to, as we head towards the end, let's do a little bit of analysis here, or sort of crystal ball gazing. For starters, it's an easy one. APC, it surprised everybody when you didn't make it back to Parliament. But let's say you were in this current 7th administration now. Would APC form part of this government of national unity if you had have got seats in Parliament?
Look, if you look at all coalition governments, and I think the freshest one is the German one, for me it is more the issues, the platform around which you agree. If there is a common platform, a minimum program, I wouldn't say a maximum program, a minimum program around which we agree, I don't think it is a question of do you like coalition governments or not, because those become realities of elections outcome. For me, the starting point will be, what do we agree upon in terms of how we run the country? I mean, you've just seen in Mpumalanga, where I come from, 19 laptops were bought for 2 million rands?
Yes.
How many such transactions do you have all over, everywhere? I've just heard that the Joburg municipality wants to go and borrow money, almost 1 billion there and almost 1 billion there. Yeah. So you're leaving the municipality in a mess. So how do we deal with those things around good governance? Secondly, around policies. How do we ensure that, you see, now we're talking about VAT, there is no money, let's go, and yet you had very profitable state-owned entities from which you could get dividends to, fill up your state coffers. I mean, when I was chairperson of SCOPA, Transnet had a materiality level of 600 million. What that means is that anything below 600 million, the Auditor General would ordinarily not bother to report on it because of the high revenue generation that it was making. What has happened to it? So if we agree on policy, then there will be no problem. I wouldn't want to say if you have the DA and the Freedom Front. I don't think that's a proper approach. The issue is what is the platform? If the platform is good, we're good to go. If it's not, I don't think we'll be interested in that.
Now, you brought up some of the struggles that they've had, largely with the budget issue, the budget crisis. Do you think that this is something that will split up the GNU, or do you think that this might enhance our politics with a bit more openness and a bit more discussion?
I think more than just the latter. Because I think the ANC was behaving more like a bankrupt millionaire who still feels like he's still a millionaire when he's bankrupt. They behave like they still have a majority when when they don't. So their ability to negotiate, if I can go a little further, just like the Americans, they are not good diplomats because for the last 30 years or so, they've gotten used to telling people what to do rather than think, negotiate, engage. So the ANC has, so I think this budget thing, which by the way is always a problem where you have a coalition government. I mean, we had early elections in Germany because of budgetary disagreements. I think it has taught the ANC that they need to be more open, they need to be a bit more thoughtful, they need to crumble the GNU, not at all. I think they are all too invested. I think the DA and his friends will certainly not want to lose the foothold they have within the levers of state power. Secondly, the ANC, for self-preservation, they realize their only way to survive is clinging for dear life with the partners that they have. That they are trying to negotiate with the EFF and MK. It was just a ruse that Mandela used against the National Party during negotiations. When he didn't get his way, sometimes he would say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to meet my brothers in the PAC. We'll see what to do." And the National Party will say, no, okay, sit down, let's talk. So I don't think, I think they will make up in peace.
Okay, but then you did say one thing in your first point around this. You said that the lesson has been learned, or there's been the lesson of negotiation that the ANC should have learned. But I've sat in many lessons where the teacher has spoken some wonderful things but not learned because I wasn't listening. Do you think those lessons will actually change the behavior? Because that's the real issue now.
Well, Frantz Fanon talks about cognitive dissonance, although it's in relation to belief. But I'm saying the ANC has faced up to the reality that they don't have a majority. And if they don't, pull their partners along, their opponents are waiting ready to pounce. So, and I'm sure that whatever forces are interested in this arrangement are whispering to them that you are messing up. You are messing up. So they will be pulled along kicking and screaming because it's such a humiliation for them. I mean, from having 2/3 majority under Mbeki to being 40%. It's yeah.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, along the way you get some people that should be in Parliament but aren't. And sitting with me has been somebody who I think our Parliament would have been richer to have had there rather than some of the people who are there now. Themba Godi, thank you so much. Thank you very much to everybody that watched this today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. If you want to rent a car, go to Pace, use our code SONA, SONA, just to get a discount. If you want to see more great content and you want to entertain your clients or your stakeholders, come and join us at our State of the Nation Business Breakfast on the 25th of June, where we'll have very popular journalist JJ Tabani, as well as political commentator and sometimes politician Neil De Beer at the Sandton Convention Centre. More details below. But thank you so much for joining us on the State of the Nation. Themba Godi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Talk about Patricia. I've worked with her. And even when she was in the PAC, she always had, far away from the cameras and the public, a very, very